All right, folks, and we are back, and this time sounds like we have good audio and everything. So, again, we are here with Chris Wiedemann from the immixGroup, a market intelligence consultant. We're going to be talking about the 2018 budget that came out this morning, and specifically what this budget has in store for the federal contract community, specifically around IT. Chris, once again, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So starting off, was there anything, just doing a cursory look at the budget that came out this morning or from the briefing with the OMB director, Mick Mulvaney, earlier today, was there anything that popped out at you and went, this is going to be important for the tech industry?
Well, it's difficult to get too far into the specifics because although we have a little more granularity than we did from the skinny budget, we're still waiting to see agency level details. So we've got kind of top line levels here. But nothing in terms of specific programs. That said, the request was tough in the sense that it cut non-defense discretionary at levels that we were, expecting to see, but maybe hoping not to. Those levels, if they go through at anything like what the administration is asking for, that will have a pretty serious ramification, not just for the technology industry, but for industry as a whole. There are a couple different ways that I think we're starting to hear people talk about the way that they might mitigate for that, but it's very early days still.
Of course, right? This just dropped, so we're definitely on the cutting edge here. One of the things that I saw in there that was interesting, these budget documents that come out, they're less about the numbers, more about the priorities that come out in a paragraph form. It's a narrative. One of the things I see in here is provide a comprehensive plan to reform the federal government and reduce the federal civilian workforce. Right. Is that inherently a boon to the tech industry?
It certainly could be. One of the ways that you often hear workforce reductions talked about is in the context of automation, right? So, the mission footprint doesn't necessarily shrink at the same rate as the workforce does. And so that is something that I think certainly some parts of industry will be looking at as an opportunity. In the short term, oftentimes that ends up benefiting folks more on the services end of things. But in the longer term, there's definitely an opportunity from the product side, from the software side to work on messaging tools around that as well.
What parts of the budget do you see as growth areas? I mean, is there anywhere, if you're in the tech industry right now, if you're a federal contractor and you've got a chance to pivot your business, what do you pivot towards?
Yeah, the obvious answer is border security. That, of course, has been a priority of the administration and of the candidate since he started running. We see additional funding requested for that. The other kind of, I guess, major emphasis for them is on law enforcement. And so that's a potential, it doesn't necessarily require a pivot in technology, but it does suggest a new customer group that, if you weren't working with them before, I would certainly recommend reaching out now. A third area where I think we expect to see growth in spend is Veterans Affairs, both on the health side and on the benefits side. So again, another potential customer group.
One of the other things we've heard the administration talk about a lot, we've seen some recent movement in Congress on the modernizing government IT, right? This is obviously going to be a big spot for contractors. Looking at the GSA budget, I found an interesting nugget here. GSA is getting $278 million for 3 new initiatives spread across its 3 service lines. Almost all of that, $228 million, is going to support the establishment of the Technology Modernization Fund. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of the first time where we've seen a dollar figure on this central fund. Is that a big enough number? I mean, the original one was $3.1 billion before, right when President Obama proposed it. 228, that's a big chunk of what GSA is getting. Is that enough? Is that the right amount?
Mm-hmm. I think the original number was actually 4.1, although I could be wrong on that. So the 228 is much more in line with the MGT Act that just passed through the House last week, I believe that was. So it's a different approach that they're taking there. Personally, it's been, again, speaking from my own opinion, one that I think could work. And the amount of money available is certainly smaller, but there are things that you can do with relatively a little upfront capital investment that you would draw from that modernization fund in order to achieve those things that lead to longer term cost savings. So as to whether or not it's enough, it depends on what exactly people were hoping to get out of this. I think what you're going to see from that fund are many more projects. Like, many agencies have already moved, for example, their email systems into a cloud-based solution, but some haven't. And this fund is something that they could use fairly easily for that. You might start seeing pilots of maybe intra-agency or possibly even cross-agency deployment of things like collaboration platforms. There's some low-hanging fruit out there that I think with a relatively light upfront capital investment, you could realize some efficiencies. What's going to be hard to do is any kind of more enterprise level, let's say cloud migration. It's just not a lot of money available for something like that.
Which is a shame, because the central fund, the whole idea was getting these really critical systems where agencies couldn't reprogram their own funding because it just wouldn't be enough. So this definitely sounds like it's going to be helpful. More money is always a good thing for getting these things kicked off, but might not be the silver bullet that some had hoped it was going to be.
Well, I think a lot of the success of that fund depends on whether MGT passes and whether the working capital funds at the agency level that bill would create are actually signed into law. Because what you could start achieving there is kind of a snowball effect, where again, these initial upfront sort of low-hanging fruit investments lead longer term to enough working capital at the agency level that they can really start looking at some of the more intractable legacy silos. But that's a couple years down the road, and it looks like the Senate is less convinced on MGT than the House was. So we're still waiting to see how that goes.
Definitely, it's going to be important to watch. When President Trump was first elected, a lot of people in industry were pretty happy about that fact. You had a businessman coming in as president. It was going to seem like it was going to be more of a push towards getting more business into government, more private-public relationships. Is that reflected in this budget? Is it more middle of the road, something standard, or is it the opposite of that? Is this the kind of budget that the private industry, the tech industry wanted to see?
Again, I think it's kind of hard to say without knowing more at the agency level about what they want to do. Again, more programmatically. Certainly, there's a lot of emphasis on public-private partnerships, specifically in the infrastructure plan. Although we didn't get a huge amount of detail there, at least we had a reaffirmation that the private sector industry is likely to play a large role there. Other than that, this budget, although some of the numbers are stark, let's say, it's not too dissimilar from what you would expect to see out of a Republican administration. And so you can make kind of the general observation that Republican administrations, industry tends to prefer them. I hope I'm not being too controversial when I say that. But I don't know about this budget specifically and whether it's really altering any conditions in a fundamental way as it pertains to the tech industry, certainly.
So immixGroup, you guys are uniquely positioned to really talk to the federal contracting community. Your whole thing is you guys advise companies to help them get these contracts based on the data, based on the numbers. So later today, as you're meeting with all your clients, what are you going to be telling them?
Well, a couple of things. One, if you have customers on the defense side of the house, that sector, that part of government looks to receive pretty significant spending increases in this budget. So that's obviously good news. That said, I tend to take a pretty cautionary approach when I'm talking about certainly presidential budget requests. That's important to remember. We didn't see any of the Obama administration's budget requests go into law as they were written. These things are sort of opening salvos in a longer negotiating process. Based on kind of some initial feedback that we're hearing from the Hill, I think there are certainly parts of this budget that are less likely to make it into appropriations than others. And so my general take from these is they are useful in that they tell us what the administration wants to do. They're sort of a priority statement. But as far as actual dollar figures, as far as kind of the rubber meeting the road in terms of spending government money, they are at best sort of an incomplete guideline there. And so my kind of general takeaway there is, be a little cautious, be a little circumspect in the way that you're thinking about this. You should certainly take it into account, but it's not the be all end all for the coming fiscal year.
Fantastic, Chris. Anything else you wanted to add about the budget docs we got to see today?
Other than that sort of general cautionary note, which my team is somewhat famous for, no, not particularly. We're still waiting to see a little bit more granularity that comes out of this. We should have more to say, for example, when the IT portfolio estimates are released. That's going to help us a lot, certainly. But just in general, again, while these opening budget documents are useful, you can often glean more information from the agency level, programmatic level spending requests. We haven't seen those yet. So, there's only so much that we can read into this.
Yep, definitely. Well, we'll have to have you back when those more granular budget docs come out, so we can break
Absolutely.
all that down for everyone. Okay, Chris, appreciate you joining us today. And for everybody out there, this will be we'll be downloading this and have the full recorded version on the site shortly, just in case you missed any part of it. And join us again next time for Federal Times Live. Chris, thanks again.
Yep, thanks a lot.